It's wonderful to be here with you all. I'm the managing partner at ZingTrain, and I've worked in the organization for nearly 20 years. I led our retail shop at our bakehouse for 6.5 years, and I joined ZingTrain as a trainer in 2011 and became managing partner in 2018. I played collegiate basketball in the Southeastern Conference at Vanderbilt many years ago and found that as good as winning feels, we learn most when we lost. Our team was certainly ripe for wanting to improve so that we could perform better going forward. The same is true here at work. As hard as it is to acknowledge when our culture is shifted, it gives us a chance to explore the parts that we want to strengthen and let go of the parts that are no longer serving us. It's my hope today that as I can share some tools that helped our team get back to center and give you food for thought, as many folks are always looking to strengthen their culture. All right, this is what we hope you'll leave the webinar with. Ways to recognize and name cultural shifts, ways to gather data and more input, and then tools and systems to recenter or enhance your culture going forward. I hope this sounds like what you're tuning in for. All right, we're going to talk about some framing. We'll get into acknowledging the cultural shift, getting data and information, and then taking action on that information. To set the stage for my personal experience with the cultural shift at work, this is something that went on in 2020. Our revenue went to zero. We furloughed 11 people. We were able to bring back a group of 7 in April of 2020. And that group remade our business while we introduced virtual training. In the fall of 2021, we hired 2 folks that could help us start to do some in-person training again at ZingTrain. Also that fall, the person who led our marketing efforts let us know that they were going to go back to grad school. And in evaluating that position, we thought that job is better if we split it into 2 positions because it had grown. So we hired 2 folks to replace her in January of 2022. We added another trainer in June of 22. And those 5 hires increased our team by 50% within 9 months. And we certainly had some growing pains. Of the 5 people we hired, 2 were really misaligned with their positions. One wanted a different job 2 months after being hired, and the second person only wanted to work remotely, even though their job required being in person to fulfill the job responsibilities. By December of 2022, the team's energy was low, people felt disconnected and actively talked about. I never thought I would feel disconnected at ZingTrain. There was gossip happening, direct conversations with me about what were my plans to solve all these problems. So it was a tough time. And as I mentioned earlier, playing basketball in college, I was a 3-year captain. By 2022, I had worked as a people manager for more than 15 years. And even with all that experience, this was the first time I felt out of my depth and really unsure about what to do to get our team back on track. I'm going to take you through my process of exploration and how we were able to forge a path forward to a more improved culture. All right. Before we get into actions we can take, there's 2 internal frameworks that help set the tone for conversations we were having on the team. These 2 frameworks are our training compact and the business perspective chart. For those that have been in our training before, these will look familiar. I will talk specifically about how it relates, though, to looking at organizational culture. For training compact, we find that a responsibility is 100% on both sides, which means that what we agree to as an organization on the left-hand side, and what's on the right-hand side is what we ask of our team. And what this translates to, while it says training on this compact, it's really that we are 100% responsible for our work experience. As the managing partner at ZingTrain, I'm responsible for the performance of ZingTrain 100%. I'm 100% responsible for how I show up, and our team is responsible for how they show up. It's really helpful to have this as a baseline framework organizationally. All right. The second tool is our business perspective chart. And there's about 60 of you on the webinar that were in last month's webinar that Joni did about the business perspective chart more in depth. I'm going to talk specifically about 3 areas that we're going to focus on as it relates to this chart. This chart gives us common language to have discussions when things aren't going as well as we'd like. The three areas of focus are going to be our mission, which literally frames all of our actions around the border, our systems, and our culture. To start off, our mission, this is our North Star. We will always be striving towards our mission, which is the gist is the first line. We're going to share the Zingerman's experience with as many people we come into contact with. And if there's organizational strife or people are at odds with one another, we aren't going to be focusing on the work. We're going to be focusing on how we're not really getting along, or how things don't feel like they used to, or they aren't going as well as we'd like. Having a mission that you could point to helps us with decision making, and again, provides us that North Star that we're working towards. Systems are on the right-hand side here. This is what we say we do. And this could be policies, procedures, approaches to customer service, how we handle complaints. These are all systems. Systems help ensure consistent results. And we measure on those three at the bottom of the chart there: great food, great service, and great finance. Now, culture on the left-hand side, it can mean many things. In relation to this chart, we think of it as like, what's actually happening at work right now? And you can see that there's a gap between what we want to be happening and what's actually happening, and we call it a systems culture gap. Our job is to help close that gap as close as possible. What often happens in a culture shift at work is that our systems aren't being followed, or our culture is demanding that the systems be updated, but we've got some gaps. And if we've got that gap, there's not going to be a way for us to consistently deliver on the results that we've agreed to at the bottom there. Having this common language for, it seems like we've got a systems culture gap about that issue, is a little more neutral than my opinion or somebody else's opinion about what's going on. All right. We want to acknowledge the cultural shift. This is our first step. Acknowledgement is the first step. Naming is a really powerful practice in mindfulness. So once something is named, it provides some distance between yourself and the experience. You become an observer, allowing for a more objective perspective versus being consumed by emotions. And if we can be an observer of what's going on, this can help reduce emotional intensity, and you can more quickly get to clearer executive functioning. Naming lets people know that you're noticing something that's going on. Maybe you call it out in a meeting, and we'll talk about some examples in just a minute. Naming represents a shift from a more passive observation standpoint to more active. Maybe that you're handling a performance-related problem in the background with an individual, and sometimes addressing certain things in front of a group. I wouldn't say we're not going to handle a performance problem in front of a group. And we can also question or check in on some behaviors, like maybe in a meeting, that might be starting to fracture some of the cultural elements. And by naming, it helps to set the table for more actions to come. When we name the issue or the opportunity, then we can be part of the solution going forward. If we stay in denial and continue to act like nothing's going on or everything is fine, I think we've all experienced this in relationships from one time or another. Maybe it's just going to get better. It does not get better. It's like when you let a taproot in a weed continue to grow, the larger it's going to get, the more we let that thing grow. Same is true around cultural fractures. The ways that we can acknowledge a cultural shift. This looks like being a curious observer. Paul, our co-founder, has got a great quote, "When furious, get curious." I often like to think of people working on cars at a car repair shop. Someone brought their car in, they've got yellow lights on the dash. The car repair folks are looking into what are the signs or evidence to try to get at what is the root cause. when you're observing, being a curious observer about your culture, you can start your intuitive sense is like, oh, this seems different than it was, or I don't really like the direction this is going. That's the yellow light. And then the car repair folks are like trying to get at what's underlying this issue. So be curious. Also, calling in instead of calling out, but calling in systems culture gaps. When you see that we've got a gap between what's happening and what's supposed to be happening, talk about it. Again, naming it lets us name it, and then we can start working with it. And then have regular check-ins with all of your direct reports. My goal is to meet with our team, my direct reports once a month. And I don't always hit it, but that is the goal, because I find that in those check-ins, you want to create space for people to share their thoughts, give them a chance for them to bring things up to me about what's going on with them or things that they've got questions or concerns about. You can also check in with them about their energy related to the work, asking if there's things that could improve, like maybe they might need more support, they might feel overloaded with their workload. So talking about those things can help level set. What's the tone of the things that they're saying? Are they feeling supported? Are they sounding more aggressive or passive aggressive? Trying to get at some underlying things. All right, then we want to get some data and information. The ways that we like to do that: staff survey. We do a staff survey in December as a part of our performance review process. We do some, it's a self-review. So formalize ways to get feedback from the team that's consistent and regular. So having a system for it means that it's not a surprise, and you can start to see where are their trends, and it normalizes asking the group questions about the team dynamic beyond your observations. Now, I'll say that if things are a little rough right now, maybe don't do a staff survey right away. Maybe you have some things that you're trying to improve in the next 6 months, and then maybe do a survey to see, like, are your efforts helping? We do 360 feedback at ZingTrain, which means that everyone on the team gives feedback to each other, and I also get that feedback. I will say that when things are going well, the tone of that feedback for our colleagues is pretty neutral and constructive. And when things were out of sorts in 2022, you can imagine that things were a little shorter, a little curt. There was very strong feedback to me as the leader about concerns about how things were going, and some very pointed questions about why are you not fixing things? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then gathering customer feedback. Are we getting more complaints or more compliments? This is a place where calling on systems culture gaps around customer feedback can really help point out different things that might be a little more neutral, because it's related to the customer's experience versus, gosh, I find it really hard to work with this person, or stylistically we're different, or they really seem to be in a funk lately. By focusing on the customer feedback, it can be very, again, focused on the work, focused on the mission, delivering on that, and the overall performance of our department or our organization. And then use already scheduled meetings as a way to get informal information. The way I like to do this is with icebreakers. Maybe you have some team norms that you haven't revisited in a while. Maybe talking about what's one team norm you really resonate with, and what's one team norm that you feel could be strengthened on the team. It's just a good way to get a pulse for where people are. We also do energy checks at the start of our meetings. Our trainers meet on Monday mornings. We do an energy check, and then we also rate our energy at the start of our weekly huddle. And that's on a scale of 0 to 10. Where is our energy? And you can just start to informally track some of those things in your meetings. Let's say folks are consistently at like a 6 or a 7 energetically. Like, that's not going to bode well for doing quality work. And ideally energy is around 8 or 9, or that we're kind of like moving in that direction. Folks are probably curious, what are some of those self-review questions? And you can see them there on the screen. There are other questions as a part of the self-review, and we'll include those in the follow-up. We also report the scores back to the staff with their permission, because it doesn't help if only I see that information, because we all make up how the group dynamic is going. And so it's helpful to see, like, is this tracking with how folks are having their own personal experience? And you can see these questions here. It's pretty vulnerable to have folks answer those questions really honestly. In college, when I was playing basketball, after every game, we would watch film. And I might have felt like I was in really good, like, defensive position, but the film doesn't lie. When I would watch that film, it was like, you were you were not in good defensive position. That's why you got beat on that play. And so it would track with how Coach Foster was talking to us about being in defensive position. And so when I read the scores from the staff's honest assessment of how things are going, I find it very valuable. All right, then we want to take some action on the information. What are we going to do next? This looks like we're going to report back the survey information. This was a big learning for Amy at the bakehouse when I was working there. When a staff survey would come out, I think we did it twice a year at that time. Sometimes people would wait, some staff members would wait for the survey, and then they would put some real daggers in there and be like, okay, here you go, leadership team, here's all your problems to solve. And instead of that approach, we would share back the survey information, and then collectively, each department would work on 1 or 2 areas of focus based on the feedback. Back to that training compact. Remember, we're 100% responsible for the performance of the department and also how we're showing up. So this was, again, I'm responsible for the performance of ZingTrain. I'm responsible for how I'm showing up. And when there's opportunities for improvement, then how are we collectively going to work on that? So this is not deflecting my responsibility as a leader, and it's really acknowledging that we all are playing a part. Having a vision for the organization or for your department can help get us from our current state out further to what does success look like in the future. Sometimes folks will write a vision in a department for how we are working successfully together, or what do we want the culture to look like. And in 2022, when I was feeling way out of sorts, it was like, okay, do we have a departmental vision? We had started working on one in September, and we were able to finalize it, I think, in around March of 2023. So that work we did collectively, and it was helpful to have that to point to, because you can say, oh, okay, well, if we're working in this way by 2028, what are some things we need to do now to help make some improvements? We also have 3 times a year, we get together our entire staff to work on the business versus working in the business. So things that we don't often have time to discuss in our weekly huddles, we can go more in depth in those offsites, and we really protect that time so that we can connect on things that are really important. Planning, strategic planning, goals and action steps. And one thing that was particularly powerful in April of this year, over the last, I would say, 12 or 14 months, we've had a couple things happen culturally that felt like we needed to acknowledge some shifts that had happened. So to kick off our offsite in April, we all talked about what were some things that we miss about how things were working in 2024, and what were some things we were hopeful about for the future going forward. It wasn't that there was outright nobody was saying like, gosh, things feel different, or things, everyone was kind of rallying, but there's just things just didn't quite feel aligned. And by giving people place and time and space to name some of the things that they were experiencing and feeling, I feel like that was helped us get to a better place, because it was able to honor and acknowledge feelings that people were having. And then we can focus on our current state going forward. We drafted some team agreements in 2023 that I found to be a very productive use of our time. We had some norms that we created, I think, back in 2017 that no longer felt like ours. The team has shifted. We've certainly been through a lot since COVID. And having some agreements, especially after a tumultuous 2022, we wanted to talk about how we were working together. So we didn't call them norms, we called them agreements, because norms is kind of like a suggestion, and agreements were like, no, we agree, this is how we're going to work together. And I'll share those on the next slide. And then I also was doing a lot of internal looking in 2022 on like, what is my level of service to the folks that I'm working with? Are there one or two more folks that are that I could have some more contact with that might, help enhance how things are going, especially ones that seem the most disengaged? There can be a temptation if someone is like feeling disengaged that you like give them space. And I will say that while that is easier emotionally, I find that it is better, in my experience, to lean into some of those conversations and make sure that regular check-ins are happening. Because again, something might get uncovered in a one-on-one meeting. I think having more contact, not less, when you're feeling disengaged from somebody is really important. And then make sure staff have a chance to be involved in things outside their immediate role. We call this 1+1 work. It might be teaching a class, or for us, meeting someone from another part of the organization. We can like operate in our lane about the work that we're doing, and we can be real critical, real fast about how horrible things are. And also, like, when you have a chance to meet folks from other parts of the organization, do some learning or sharing, it really helps enhance the experience. And it gives you a different perspective from your regular day-to-day. All right. Now, here are team agreements. Again, too many words for a slide. And also, I think we drafted these in 2023. The thing that is as important as what you see on the screen is we talked about, in addition to drafting these, so we spent a lot of time on this, we also had some subgroups that worked on the second part of this document, which is, what does it look like when we're in alignment? And what does it look like when we're not in alignment? It really brings the agreements to life, because this is not just like a check the box, like, oh yeah, I did this, but like, we're committed to supporting each other. We talk about what does that look like, and what does it look like when we're not in alignment? And we'll include those in the follow-up. It's time for us to bring these back out and talk about these maybe at our huddle, or discussing them once a week or once a month to like bring them more to life. I feel like these are more accurate than our team norms that we had a while back. And I'm really proud of this work that we did together. All right, a couple closing thoughts, and then we'll get to your questions. Celebrate when things are going well. It's like, I don't know, anyone, if you've had family strife and like you're in a good patch, celebrate when that's going well. And be on the lookout. Cultures need to be fed and watered like our most beloved plants in the garden. And solid cultures don't happen by accident. It's a lot of intention, a lot of support, and it takes everybody. And so bolster your supports. Having supports in place mean that your culture can often rebound successfully and in a shorter cycle time. And you might be feeling like, gosh, I feel overwhelmed by where to start. And that can really just be starting to gather some information, starting to check in on where do you feel like the biggest systems culture gaps are, And I often find, like, for us, if we've had customer complaints or customer feedback, like, okay, well, that is an easy place to start. Or if the staff seem to be like at odds more, like what might be underlying that? If someone isn't having something going on at home, then maybe some needs aren't being met at work. Maybe they're not being recognized enough. Maybe they're being microaggressed against, so that's where like having those one-on-one check-ins can start to give you some more information. And as you think about all of those check-ins in aggregate, what are some of the themes that you're taking away? Really putting that curiosity hat on can help try to uncover where things might be a little awry. And keep up the great work. This work is taxing. It is hard. Looking internally about how you're doing as a leader and seeing where you might be part of the problem, if you will, or the part of the opportunities that we have, that is hard to face those things. And it is extremely worthwhile. So you're doing great. And you can acknowledge some progress while you still know that there's a far way to go. So I definitely feel that in terms of like, I feel like we were able to recover from 2022 and things continue to evolve. As you have new folks on the team or your dynamics are shifting, again, it's like a garden. Things aren't static in a garden. They grow and evolve and change. And I think the same is true about our cultures. All right, let's get to some questions.
I'm back. Hello. Thank you, Katie.
Hello. Should we maybe take, we can stop sharing there. Okay.
Okay, we do have some questions.
Great.
So one is calling back to energy check-ins with the team. Someone says, I understand the concept, but what are some ways to implement them? My team might look at me like I had 6 heads if I asked them what their energy was.
Yes. All right. So energy is something we talk about in some of our workshops, and we learned this from Anise Kavanaugh, and it's really a way to assess somebody's energetic impact. I'm going to answer what it is, and then I will talk about how I think you might be able to start some of this. So we think about our energy as our physical energy, how's our body feeling, and then our emotional energy. And then our vibrational energy is the energy that we can't actually assess for ourselves. It's how our coworkers are sensing us. It's really like when you show up on a shift and can get a sense for like, how is the day going? That's the energetic impact. We've all worked with an energy vampire, and we've also worked with like an energy bucket filler. And while it might seem like woo-woo, you could either be an energy drain or you could be an energy faucet, and thinking about how can I surround myself with faucets. And if you feel like it's too woo-woo, you know that all your coworkers are impacting your day all the time with how they're showing up. And having some common language for your energy seems a little bit lower than it normally is. Is there anything I can do to help? We've got a recipe, and we can put some resources also in our follow-up about energy. We want to read it. We want to, read it, then we want to vision it. Where do we want it to be at later on in the day? Then we want to manage it. What are some things that I need to do to get myself from where I currently am to where I'd like to be? And then the last one is to repeat. Now, in terms of implementing, maybe you start to assess your own personal energy, like when you show up to work. What are things that are raising your energy? What are things that are lowering your energy? Maybe if things are negative at work, that's lowering your energy. But it's also designing your own day around, okay, I've got a meeting with someone that can often get me into some lower energy. Maybe I don't schedule a meeting immediately after that one, but instead some time for me to take a walk, get a coffee, make a phone call. So I would start first with yourself. And then as you're in meetings, you could even start to try to assess your colleagues' energy. And then you could see like, all right, well, these folks are regularly contributing, their energy seems high. We've got one person that, has opportunities around energy. And we're big fans of like running a trial, but I would start with yourself first. And if you do want to start a trial, and if you have regular meetings, then just say like, we're going to try some things out. Because it's so much better to enter a conversation with your energy seems a little lower than it normally is. Is there anything I can do to help? Is so much better than like, seems like you're in a bad mood today. And I'm like loaded with all kinds of judgment. And so hopefully that helps.
Donna has a question. This is about measuring customer feedback. Do you rely on reviews from places like Google or a point of sale to measure feedback, or do you craft specific customer feedback?
I think with feedback, we want it in any and all ways we get it. And even if you might not agree with the feedback, it's still data. And so I would take, if it's on Google, if it's for us, we collect data across our organization. Miss Kim, our Korean restaurant, they give you like a little card at the end of your meal, like rate how it went. ZingTrain will do an evaluation at the end of our work webinar. You want as much data as possible, and you want to survey people in ways that make sense for them, because all of that data gives you a more complete picture of how things are going.
Yeah. And I will say we try to ask the same questions when we can ask a customer for feedback. We try to figure out where are all the ways we can ask for feedback, and we try to ask the same set of questions so that we're having consistent answers that we can use over time to look at a trend. Yeah.
Because with feedback, and if you ask, we use the Net Promoter Score, so it's a scale on 0 to 10. You've seen the questions. You'll see it shortly. How likely are you to recommend us based on your most recent experience on a scale of 0 to 10? And there was some really compelling thought I was going to share. The key is like, get your score, and then see, is the score going up? Is it staying the same, or is it going down? And if people will tell you how it's going. And so the most important thing is that you start, and then you see, is it trending in the direction you want? So I am like less emotional about where we start and more driven to how are we maintaining or improving going forward. Mm-hmm. Which is why it's helpful to, like Katie mentioned, to have the same questions, the same rating, so that you can see, okay, well, last year, this is what was going on. Seems like it's lower. Oh, that tracks with how we were performing. And that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, Martha asks, how do you manage culture across different businesses and locations? Is there some delegation in that regard?
Well, every location is going to have a different subculture. As much as you can try to say, oh, we're one business. I mean, that is true at Zingerman's. We are in an industrial park at ZingTrain, and right across our parking lot is our coffee and candy company. And then we've got a creamery and then the bakehouse. If you go in all those retail shops, it is a different experience, even though we still have the same 3 steps for great service, 5 steps for handling complaints. We have the same mission that we're working towards. So I will say that having some of those guardrails, guidelines, systems, and supports on like, what is our service approach, helps us, because you're going to have different subcultures in each location. It's just natural. You've got different leaders, you've got different staff members. It would be boring if it was exactly the same. What I get excited about is like, this is what we agree to do from a service standpoint. And then we can track to that. Like, is the 10-4 rule being used when greeting at each of those locations? And so if you have some guidelines on like, this is what our service approach is, this is how we handle complaints, then as you visit those different locations, you can check in with those managers on, are these things happening? Again, you've got customer complaints and compliments, hopefully, that you're tracking to see like, Is this moving in the direction that we want? But to have some of those supports in place so that you have something to measure against, because then otherwise, and it's just like anecdotal, like it just feels different, but you're not able to really articulate, well, what is different? And then is that different under the like good umbrella or the, gosh, it feels like we're moving away from our center. We got to define what center is. And then we can say like, yes, this is happening, or no, it's not. Because I think I want not able to have an approach if I don't know what I'm measuring against. So would we delegate? I would just make sure that you're having whoever is reporting to you, that you have regular touch points, and maybe getting all those leaders together on a regular basis so that there's some cohesion from a leadership team standpoint. And you probably are already doing some version of that.
Yeah.
Hopefully that helps.
We're at time, but we have two more questions that I think would be really, really helpful to answer. So I just want to say that we are going to send the recording. So if you are unable to stay on for a couple more minutes, you will get the answers to these questions in the recording. And thank you for joining us. If you do need to pop off, you will hear from me again soon in your inbox. But Katie, I'm gonna, if you don't mind,
Please.
so the next question we have is from Brent. And he asks, have you had a different approach about all of this when it comes to management being the crux of cultural degradation?
That's a tricky one, because this is when it's like other things are bubbling up from other parts of the organization, like the leader is really the problem. And I would say that everybody plays a part. You can't make a leader be curious about making improvements. So that's tricky. Nobody can make anybody do anything else. And do we have ways to get opinions out, thoughts out, that can feel safe for people? Because if we aren't regularly looking at some of these things, we can be operating in a vacuum and thinking everything is fine. And I'll say that if there's cultural things going on, I don't need to know what product or service you make to know that that's not, at some point it's going to have an impact on your service quality, the product quality. You can't function in dysfunction and still produce like high level goods or services. When I have needed to give feedback up in an organization, making sure that I tie my feedback to some organizational, either our guiding principles or our mission or how it's impacting the customer, typically goes a lot further than like, boy, I just don't really like working with you, or I don't like your style of working. And I know you're not suggesting this, Brent. And then it's about the customer's experience or about the quality goods or services that we make, and less about, gosh, you're a real toxic problem. And if there's like survey information or customer complaints that are happening, or like quality levels are lowering, then let's talk about that. How can we make some improvements there? And then at some point, you've got to decide, like, I can either stay in this environment or I need to go, because you can't force a toxic person to like look in the mirror and say like, oh, I'm part of the problem. So that's a tricky part.
Yeah. Thank you for taking the taking the question. It is a tricky one. Okay, and then the last question is from an anonymous person. We have a very diverse group, and culturally, some people do not offer their opinions. How can I help to get everyone to engage more and understand that their voice is important to the team? I have asked, but I get very little input most times.
There are times when people are like, I have an open door policy. I don't know why anyone's not coming to me. And it's like, okay, well, so one story, Ari, our co-founder, used to get really frustrated because people would go to Paul, our other co-founder, when they needed something. Ari had in the past been very self-critical and was critical in the way that like he and his family, like showing care was like being they showed love by talking about all the ways that you could improve. And so you could imagine if like that's how Ari's conducting himself with the staff, which is like, let me tell you all the ways that you need to improve. And he was thinking that he was like doing something really helpful. And the staff was just like, gosh, this guy is so critical. Naturally, they would gravitate more to Paul. And so Ari finally was like frustrated by that and stopped to say like, oh, okay, well, I wonder why they might be going only to Paul. How can I be, more open? I would say that, especially as someone that is more extroverted, I've learned over time that people process differently, and you've got to give people space and time to process. And coming up with a brainstorm in a meeting might not be the right way for all parties involved. And so, like, if you want to gather feedback, sometimes, especially if English is a second language, people might not want to put it in writing. Maybe they want to have a conversation. But really think about, how can I make this the most emotionally safe for this person and less awkward? Maybe gathering feedback in a small group of 3 might be helpful, because then they've got the support of their colleagues, and being very clear about what your intention is, because I think a lot of people bring baggage and hurt from other positions or other relationships that they've had, and they might not be trusting. They might feel like, gosh, if I tell you how I'm really feeling, that this might get used against me. And so it's tricky, because it's multifaceted, and folks have like real life implications from before when it didn't go well. And so trying to like unpack some of that, you can't make someone trust you, and you don't want it to be awkward. Like, I'm trying to establish trust with you right now. Like, that's awkward. And over time, through your actions, they can start to feel a little more safe. We had someone that is no longer at our organization that had a horrible experience with a performance review in the past. So anytime any feedback came up, they were immediately like, oh, I'll never do that again. And it's just like, no, we're just talking. Like, it's okay. Like, there's going to be things that need to be addressed. And like, I couldn't make it safe. I by saying things, couldn't make it any more safe for them about feedback, but it just took some trust over time, when they learned, like, when we give feedback, it's part of our regular process. After a seminar, we're going to talk about how things could go better, and you're not getting fired. So sometimes this is where like the time investment, trying some different things out, can be really helpful. And then if you've got someone that might be close to that person, in your check-in with the other person that they're close to, like, hey, I'm trying to gather feedback. Here's some ideas that I have. Are there other ways you think they might be more willing to be open about what we're trying to uncover? Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I think those are great considerations. Yeah. Okay, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Katie, especially for taking the time to talk about something that's quite vulnerable, but in a really thoughtful and transparent way, to help other people navigate the same, not the same, but similar challenges that inevitably we have as people working with other people. Um, Thank all of you for joining us. And Mara, also, thank you very much for leading the chat and helping to get the questions to me so that we can get them answered. We, as you know, love feedback, and we'd love to hear what you thought of today's webinar. So we do have a quick poll, which is the Net Promoter Score. It's a rating of 0 to 10, and Mara is going to pop it up. If you don't have a lot of time, you could quickly say here, rating the experience from 0, which was really awful, to 10, which is highly recommend. And then if you have a bit more time, we do have a link that you can also give that 0 to 10 score. Plus, if you wanted to give us any feedback about what you'd like to see in future webinars, here it is. Here's the poll. So there's also an opportunity, it'll be in the chat, if you wanted to give us any feedback about future webinars or specific things that you really liked and would like to let us know. I will be sending the follow-up email tomorrow, along with, in it will be the recording of this and the slides, and then it will also live on our website. So thank you all so much, and we will hopefully see you again next month.